FBI director arrested by racist police at airport. Police immediately beg and kneel. The deep indigo sky over Chicago began to brighten subtly as the United Airlines jet glided smoothly toward runway 28R at O'Hare International Airport. Its wheels touching down with a gentle, reassuring thump. Marcus Bennett exhaled softly, a whisper of relief blending into the muted hum of the first-class cabin. It had been an exhausting flight from Washington, D.C., coming off the heels of an extended, confidential security conference in Europe that had dragged longer than planned. Marcus, nearing 60 but still carrying the strong, disciplined physique of a man seasoned by years in law enforcement and intelligence, waited patiently as the aircraft taxied toward Gate B-12. His neatly groomed silver hair framed a face lined by quiet resilience. His piercing eyes calm yet watchful, continuously scanning his environment with practiced subtlety. Clad in an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit, his dark blue tie loosened slightly after hours of travel. He exuded an air of understated authority, a man accustomed to wielding influence without ever demanding attention. In his hands he carried only a slim, black leather briefcase brimming with classified documents and a small overnight bag containing personal essentials. No entourage or visible security accompanied him. This discreet solitude was Marcus's preference during sensitive travels, allowing him to slip quietly through crowds and chaos alike, maintaining a protective cloak of anonymity. As the cabin doors hissed open, he rose, joining the stream of weary passengers disembarking into the bustling terminal, his footsteps purposeful yet unobtrusive, his vigilant gaze effortlessly registering every subtle detail of the busy airport around him. Not far from Gate B-12, amidst the constant bustle of travelers, two Chicago Police Department officers lingered casually near a concrete pillar, their bored gazes drifting across the restless sea of faces. Officer Harold Foster, a seasoned veteran in his 50s with eyes clouded by cynicism and deep-seated fatigue, leaned against the pillar, occasionally muttering complaints about the never-ending shifts and inadequate pay. Beside him stood Jason Reed, younger and still somewhat green, his posture hinting at eagerness yet shadowed by uncertainty. His youthful face caught between nervousness and the forced bravado expected by his senior partner. Suddenly, Foster's radio crackled briefly, followed by a digital notification flashing urgently on his handheld device. A vague alert from airport security about a suspicious individual near Gate B-12, male. Black, wearing dark clothing, traveling alone. The scant description brought a grim, knowing smirk to Foster's lips as his eyes scanned the arriving crowd. Swiftly locking onto Marcus Bennett, the only black man in sight who matched the superficial description perfectly. Foster nudged Reed roughly, a cruel glint of anticipation in his gaze. "Looks like we've got ourselves a client," he drawled sarcastically, his voice edged with a smug confidence born of years spent wielding power carelessly. Reed hesitated for just a heartbeat, his eyes momentarily noting Marcus's dignified composure and professional bearing, before reluctantly following Foster's lead. Together, with a demeanor that exuded arrogance more than authority, the two policemen pushed away from the pillar, approaching Marcus Bennett with an unsettling blend of menace and prejudice concealed beneath official pretenses. "Sir, stop right there." The command cut through the airport's din like a whip crack. Sharp and sudden, Marcus Bennett halted mid-step, his head turning calmly toward the two officers striding toward him with puffed chests and eyes heavy with suspicion. There was no fear in Marcus's expression, only a flicker of weary annoyance beneath his composed exterior. A familiar shadow he had faced too many times before. Officer Harold Foster closed the distance quickly, his eyes raking over Marcus with intrusive scrutiny. Standing far too close, an unspoken attempt at dominance. "We received a report about a suspicious individual matching your description," he said flatly, as if that alone granted him full access to Marcus's dignity. Identification. Now, Marcus didn't flinch. His voice, smooth and measured, held the gravity of someone long accustomed to hostile environments. "What specifically am I suspected of?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with precision. "Under the Fourth Amendment, I believe you require reasonable suspicion to detain and demand papers." The legal terms rolled off his tongue not as a threat but as a quiet reminder of the boundaries they were so eager to cross. Foster's jaw tightened. He hated being challenged. Especially by someone like Marcus, a black man who dared speak the law as if it belonged to him. "This is an airport. We don't need probable cause," Foster snapped. "Just show your ID. Unless you've got something to hide?" The implication was thick with insult. Still calm, Marcus retrieved his wallet and handed over his Virginia driver's license, knowing full well that out-of-state status would only deepen their suspicions. Foster snatched it, his lip curling. "Virginia, huh? You don't look like you're here for a vacation. Dressed like that? Maybe some business with the White House?" The sarcasm dripped like acid. Reed, emboldened by his partner's aggression, chimed in clumsily. "Or maybe he's on a mission, drug mule. Maybe? Trailing a target?" Marcus's patience thinned but did not crack. Years of discipline under fire steadied him. "I'm on business," he said quietly, "and my profession or wardrobe are not probable cause for harassment." But Foster was past listening. The smirk on his face deepened into something darker. "People like you," he sneered, "always have something to hide." The air between them turned electric, charged with the weight of injustice and the fire of quiet resistance. Marcus took a single, deliberate step to the side. His calm gaze locked on Officer Foster. "If you have no grounds to detain me, I'll be on my way," he said, his voice steady, not rising but resonating with quiet defiance. That movement, that unflinching assertion of autonomy, ignited something primal in Foster. "You dare walk away from me?" he bellowed, his face flushing with fury. "Resisting an officer? You must be hiding something." With a sharp jerk of his head, he shouted at Reed, "Get him, he might be armed." In an instant, chaos exploded. Reed lunged forward, reaching for Marcus's arm, but Marcus, reacting with the precision honed over decades of federal service, spun out of reach and slapped the officer's hand away. "Do not touch me," he warned, his voice finally edged with fury. To the officers, that simple act of self-defense was all the justification they needed. "See? He's resisting," Foster yelled, charging forward like a predator unleashed. The terminal around them erupted in gasps and cries as the three men struggled violently in plain sight. Passengers stumbled backward, phones raised, capturing the storm of injustice unfolding before them. Marcus tried not to fight, tried to hold his ground without escalating, but the force of two younger, aggressive men proved overwhelming. They shoved him down, his shoulders slamming against the cold tile floor as his briefcase and bag spilled open, scattering papers and personal effects. Reed yanked his arms behind his back, locking them with unforgiving steel, the metallic bite of the handcuffs slicing into Marcus's wrists. Pain shot up his arms. But worse than the physical agony was the deep humiliation, the crushing weight of being treated like a threat. A criminal, for daring to exist with dignity. Foster stood over him, panting, victorious. "I knew it," he sneered, waving Marcus's license mockingly. "You stubborn types always need a lesson." And just like that, a man of stature, a servant of the law, was dragged to his feet in cuffs, paraded like a trophy, while the crowd watched in stunned silence. As Marcus stood, his suit disheveled, wrists burning beneath the tight metal cuffs, Foster loomed close, grinning with smug satisfaction. "Tough guy, huh?" he sneered, waving the Virginia license like a victory flag. "Let's see how long that attitude lasts at the station." Marcus said nothing, but his eyes, calm, piercing, unreadable, never left Foster's face. Then, with an eerie composure that cut through the tension like glass, he spoke, each word deliberate and heavy. "My name is Marcus Bennett." Foster scoffed, still amused. "Yeah? So what?" But Marcus's next words came with quiet power. "Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Time froze. Foster's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned, sickly expression as the blood drained from his face. Reed staggered a step back, his eyes wide, mouth agape, the weight of recognition crashing down like a tidal wave. You said what?" Foster stammered, barely able to breathe. "The director," he echoed, voice cracking as the reality clawed at his composure. Panic surged. Reed dropped his hold as if burned, horror blooming across his features. "Oh God," he whispered, shaking. No, this can't be real." The arrogance drained from their bodies, leaving behind two pale, trembling men shackled by their own disgrace. Foster stumbled forward, nearly falling to his knees. "Director Bennett, sir, we didn't know," he babbled, desperation rising like bile. We didn't know who you were. It was all a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. He whirled on Reed. Unlock him. Now. Reed fumbled, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he dropped the key, then scrambled to retrieve it. The metallic clink echoing like a death knell. When the cuffs finally snapped open, Marcus didn't move. He stood tall, rubbing his reddened wrists, silent and cold, eyes burning with the kind of quiet fury that didn't need words to devastate. The two officers pleaded, voices cracking, but Marcus said nothing. His silence was louder than any verdict, more damning than any curse. A sharp voice sliced through the stunned silence, steady and unmistakably authoritative. What the hell is going on here? Lieutenant Andrew Coleman strode toward the scene, his badge glinting beneath the terminal's harsh lighting, two uniformed officers flanking him. His eyes swept across the tableau. Marcus Bennett, free but visibly shaken, the crimson marks on his wrists damning. Foster and Reed, pale and visibly unraveling, practically vibrating with panic. Coleman's gaze narrowed. Foster, Reed, stand at attention. Report, now. The two men jerked upright, stammering incoherently, stumbling over half-baked excuses about vague reports and miscommunications, their voices tripping over each other in a desperate scramble for redemption. But Coleman wasn't buying it. His focus shifted to Marcus, whose calm presence emanated a quiet storm of authority. Sir, Coleman said respectfully, I'm Lieutenant Coleman, supervising this zone. Please, tell me what happened. Marcus met his gaze with a steely calm. Lieutenant Coleman, I am Marcus Bennett, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He began, his voice low and unwavering. I was stopped without cause by your officers. I was questioned with racial bias, humiliated, and violently restrained despite my cooperation. Their conduct was a direct violation of my civil rights. Coleman blinked, visibly shaken by the name. For a second, his lips parted, but no sound came. The realization landed with the weight of a freight train. Then, with sharp clarity, he turned to his men. Officers Foster and Reed, he barked, his voice cutting like a blade. Surrender your weapons, badges, and radios. You are suspended effective immediately, pending internal and federal investigation. Officers Washington and Perez, escort them to the security office. There was no resistance. Foster and Reed stood frozen as they were disarmed and led away like inmates awaiting judgment. The moment the click of the departing footsteps faded, Coleman faced Marcus again, his voice now thick with shame. Director Bennett, on behalf of the Chicago Police Department, I offer our deepest apologies. This will be fully investigated. And I assure you, this will not be buried. Marcus nodded, his silence once again more thunderous than words. The reckoning had only just begun. Word of the incident spread like wildfire, crackling through the halls of power from Chicago's police headquarters to the Justice Department in D.C. within hours. A storm had erupted, one that no amount of damage control could contain. The FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility, the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ, and the CPD's Internal Affairs Bureau launched a joint investigation with unrelenting force. Body cam footage from Foster and Reed was retrieved. Intact and unedited, undeniable. Damning. Every second captured was a smoking gun. Foster's sneers, his racially charged language, Reed's silent compliance, the excessive force, the humiliation, the moment of panic when Marcus revealed who he was. There was no defense. Reports were pulled. Histories were scrutinized. Foster's personnel file read like a roadmap of unchecked misconduct, complaints of aggression, bias, intimidation, all quietly buried or dismissed. Reed, while less tainted, was marked by a pattern of blind obedience, an unwillingness to challenge authority even when it reeked of wrongdoing. The investigation widened, digging into a systemic rot within the department, an invisible scaffolding of racism and power abuse that had allowed officers like Foster to operate with impunity for years. But now, with the director of the FBI as their victim, silence was no longer an option. Internal walls that once protected bad behavior began to crack, exposing the bitter truth beneath the surface. Foster and Reed were swiftly terminated, their dismissals read out with cold finality. But accountability didn't end with job loss. Federal charges followed. Under Title 18, U.S. Code Section 242, both men were indicted for deprivation of rights under color of law. Additional charges under Illinois statutes loomed. The justice system, long accused of shielding its own, now stood in the spotlight, forced to prove it could hold even its enforcers accountable. The arrest of Marcus Bennett was no longer just a mistake, it had become a national reckoning. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial of Harold Foster and Jason Reed commenced in the Northern District of Illinois. The weight of the nation's scrutiny bearing down on every word spoken, every breath drawn. The two former officers sat hunched at the defense table, shadows of their former selves, gaunt, colorless, aged by shame and fear. Across the aisle, the prosecution stood tall, bolstered by irrefutable evidence and a righteous sense of purpose. The body cam footage was played for all to see, raw, unflinching, damning. The jury watched as the scene unfolded frame by frame, the sneers, the insults, the violent takedown, and the moment the truth detonated like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the words, "Director of the FBI," echoed again and again, searing themselves into the collective conscience. But the trial's crescendo came when Marcus Bennett took the stand. Clad in a sharp navy suit, he spoke with the calm, unwavering clarity of a man who had faced fire and refused to bend. He recounted every moment, not to inflame, but to illuminate. There was no anger in his voice, only truth sharpened into justice. He didn't need theatrics, the facts spoke for themselves. And the silence they left in their wake was deafening. The defense squirmed, attempting to frame the attack as a misunderstanding, a moment of poor judgment under pressure, but their narrative crumbled under the weight of evidence. Nothing could erase the venom in Foster's words, the gleam of complicity in Reed's silence, the look of horror in their eyes when their prey became their prosecutor. As closing arguments ended and the jury disappeared into deliberation, the courtroom held its breath, waiting for the gavel to fall on a moment that had already reshaped the conversation around race, power, and justice. The courtroom was cloaked in silence as the jury filed back in, their faces solemn, unreadable, the tension in the air thick enough to choke. Every eye turned to the foreman as he rose, a folded slip of paper trembling slightly in his hand. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, he began. Voice steady. We, the jury, find the defendant Harold Foster guilty. A gasp rippled through the gallery. On the same charge against Jason Reed, we find the defendant guilty. Each word struck like a thunderclap, final and irreversible. Foster's head sank into his hands, shoulders trembling. Reed simply stared ahead, pale and hollow, his eyes wet with disbelief. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp, definitive. A date was set for sentencing, but the verdict had already reshaped their lives forever. Weeks later, under the heavy weight of a packed courtroom, the sentence was delivered. The judge's voice was unyielding, each syllable carrying the authority of a nation fed up with injustice. The badge is not a license to humiliate. The law is not a weapon of prejudice. You failed in your oath. She looked them both in the eyes, and then delivered the hammer blow. 6 years in federal prison. Foster crumpled like paper, the last shred of arrogance evaporating. Reed broke into quiet sobs, his fate sealed by the very system he once served. As they were led away in handcuffs, the roles reversed. It was no longer a lesson being taught, but a reckoning. Justice hadn't just arrived, it had thundered through the courtroom with the full force of consequence. The golden hue of the late afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the FBI director's office, casting long shadows across the polished floors and thick stacks of reports cluttering the desk. Marcus Bennett stood silently, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out over Pennsylvania Avenue, the city below moving with a relentless hum that now felt strangely distant. The storm had passed, at least on paper. Foster and Reed were behind bars. Justice had been done, and yet, the weight in his chest remained, a quiet ache that pulsed with every memory of the cuffs on his wrists, the cold floor, the sneering face of a man who saw him not as the nation's top law enforcement official, but as just another black man to dominate. His position had protected him in the end, his title, his power, his name. But what if he had been anyone else? What if there were no cameras, no witnesses, no Washington connections? He didn't have to imagine it. He knew. It happened every day, in cities and towns where names didn't echo through marble hallways or newsrooms. The O'Hare incident had sparked a reckoning, but the deeper sickness ran far beyond two rogue cops. It was systemic. It was old, And it was insidious. He turned from the window, the light falling now on his face, etched with calm but hardened by resolve. At his desk, he picked up a folder labeled Internal Reforms, flipping it open with purpose. This fight wasn't over, it had only begun. For every citizen unjustly stopped, silenced, or stripped of dignity, he would carry this burden forward. Not for revenge, for change, because true justice should never depend on your title, your suit, or your name. It should stand tall for everyone. True justice must be blind to power, status, or skin color. The story of Marcus Bennett is a powerful reminder that dignity, rights, and protection under the law should never depend on who you are, but simply that you are. When those in uniform abuse their authority, accountability must follow. And when one man stands firm against injustice, he can shake a system. If this story moved you, if you believe in fairness, dignity, and justice for all, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. More powerful, real, and meaningful stories are coming your way. Stand with us in the fight for truth and justice.